coming to you from Inge's Knitting Lab in Denmark. Today's topic in this tutorial is the properties of wool, merino wool, and particularly the effect of dyeing. So how does the dyeing process affect the wool, or does it? That would be nice to know. And we will take as an example this Viking Eco Highland Wool that I have used for this tree trunk sweater design. But I think the discussions we have today could equally apply to other brands and bases, because it is in general about dyeing. So first of all, when I was going to design this sweater, it was very important to me it was one of my targets or aims or goals, that I would do the sweater with as little chemistry as possible and as natural as possible. And I wanted to use a yarn that could be used for most people. People can have different sensibility to wool and itchiness and so on. So I wanted it as soft as possible. And besides cashmere, merino wool is very soft. So I was searching high and low, and I found this brand called Viking. I haven't used them before, even though they actually is manufactured and based in Norway, which is close to Denmark. But I found this, and I found, you can see here, the different colors of the natural wool. So without being an expert, I guess that they cut the sheep and with different colors, and they blend to get these different colorways. And I've talked to Viking, and they have kindly informed me which of the yarns are the natural ones and which are the dyed ones. And they have one colorway which is bleached, and this is the white one, color 200. But that was maybe a sidetrack now. But when talking about the yarn now and the dyeing process, I would like to go a step backwards, because when looking at the properties of a yarn, it is of importance where the sheep are bred and how they are bred and their climate. So let's have a look at this Viking Eco Highland Wool in the first poster here. Because these sheep, what is it? It is actually a crossbreed of a Spanish sheep and the merino sheep, and that's why it gets all of the good properties of the merino wool. So these sheep, they are walking around in the Andes mountains. They are 3,000 meters above sea level. Unfortunately, I have never been here in Peru, but so help me out there if you're coming from Peru. I've tried to figure out the climate there and the variation, and of course there is variation from sea level to mountain level. So I guess I found a website here saying that at 3,000 meters above sea level in these mountains, the temperature may vary due to seasonal variations from -7 to 19 degrees centigrade. That's 19 to 66 degrees Fahrenheit. So I guess these sheep, they have to customize to the warm weather and also to the very cold weather. So I would expect this wool to have a nice isolation power. So let's have a look at the next poster. Because as I said, as little chemistry as possible was important to me. So this specific wool is a non-superwash wool. And what does that mean? In overall general term, it means that it has not been treated with surface coating of plastic. And you apply this process in order for the yarn to be washed in the washing machine. And when doing so, you change the properties of the wool so that it loses kind of the elasticity. Maybe you have tried doing a sweater of a merino superwash wool, and certainly after wash and wear, it's much longer than when you knitted your project. And that's how it affects the wool. It loses kind of its elasticity. So this one is not, and that applies for both the non-dyed and the dyed colorways. And the color range I have linked below the shade card from Viking, so you can see for yourself. There are lots of colors to choose from. It is a worsted yarn. 50 grams is 110 meters or 120 yards, and they recommend needle sizes of size 4 and 4.5, which is US 6 and 7. And the gauge of the label says 20 stitches. They don't say anything about the row gauge, just the stitch count. And it's a it's a 4-ply yarn, and that means that it's actually both applicable for stockinette stitch, but also if you want structure on your yarn, then a 4-ply yarn is very optimal for making the structure look nice on your project. And the what's it called when it goes out of your work? I don't know the English word. If I find it, I will write it down. Otherwise, English people help me. Yeah, so that's about the yarn. And the last bullet point is not the least. It is very important. When looking for a nice yarn with as little chemistry as possible, it is a good thing to look at the label and to see the certification of the yarn. And the certification gives you kind of an assurance of how this yarn is manufactured. And on this specific yarn, you will find that it is Ecotex certified according to standard 100. And what does that mean? It means that they guarantee that there are no more harmful substances in the yarn once you get the bullet skein like this. So in the manufacturing process, a lot of testing for different substances is required in order for them to make this label. And also they get audited by an institution to see that they adhere to the requirements of the standard. So that is your insurance of the quality with regard to substances, and that's very nice knowing. You know, the highest certification you can get in a yarn is God certified, and that's I think we will cover this in another episode, but that goes for ensuring quality and from all the process, but let's take that in another episode. Okay, moving on to the characteristics of the yarn. So as this is a crossbreed, it resembles much the fineness of merino wool. And you can see here on the picture where we have a rough wool on the left hand side and a finer wool on the right hand side. When you say the fineness of a wool, it's the diameter of the hair, the protein hair, so to speak. And you can see from the scales on the hair that a fine wool has less coarse scales, and that's also why we experience it more soft to the skin. So this particular wool has 26 microns, as you can see, comparable to merino wool, and this means that it has a natural crimp, and this exactly gives us the properties that we love in a wool: the elasticity, the softness, the moisture wicking abilities, and hence the isolation and the warmth of the wool. So what happens when you then use the wool and you make your blocking or you hand wash your sweater? Then this water, when you soak it, it helps the wool fibers swell open and increases volume, and that's why you will see in this particular pattern here, the 3x1 rib, that it kind of folds out and gets more volume and widens compared to before. Let me just show you the example here. I have this in pearl gray, and this is before blocking. You cannot see the pearl line here in between. You can if you stretch, but before blocking, you see the elasticity is excellent in this yarn. Perfect. And after blocking, you will see the difference, because then it is still very elastic and will find its own equilibrium, I guess it is, but you can see the pearl line here now. And another thing about this yarn is that once you knit it, and you may think, well, I have maybe knitted a bit unevenly today, have I? But once washed and blocks, you know, the stitches settle and look so nice and even. It is, I think a pleasure to look at. Let's go to the dyeing process, because what happens? But before we look at the next poster, let me just give you a disclaimer, because I haven't contacted Viking about their specific dyeing process. I guess if I did, they wouldn't tell me, because it is confidential. That's how it is. But you can learn a lot from dyeing and talk about it in general, because there are many different processes. However, there are some general steps to go through when you do dyeing of a yarn, and that's what we will do now. So let's look at the first poster. And you can see the first step is the pre-treatment of the yarn. You have the wool or the fleece, and you need to remove dirt and waxes and oils and so on. So you apply a water wash and a rinsing and sometimes a bleaching. But I would say there's no bleaching here, but they, as I said, they informed that colorway 200, the white one, that is bleached. Okay, so next the dyeing. And in the dyeing step, we want the molecules to bind to the protein fiber of the wool, and you do that by wetting it, because again, then it helps the scale swell open, so it's ready for the dye. However, you also need some other steps in your process, and that's the temperature, the pH value, and also steam may help the bond to bind the color. So that's what you do in general terms. And then you can see on some of the pictures here that you can dye it in bulk, and it's in these tanks you put down the dye here. You could dye it in the skeins, or you could also actually dye it thread-wise. So you could imagine that these different steps in dyeing have different issues, because when you dye a bulk, like in the upper picture here, they ensure that the dye comes from the outside and the inside, but it has to diffuse through the whole could we call it cone in this instance, so that it's uniform or harmonized, uniform color all the way through. And different methods give different problems that may occur, right? But anyway, that's the dyeing process. And once the dye has binded to the fiber, then you need to fixate it and to make it color fast, because we don't want our garment to fade out with exposure to sun or during wash. So they do different things to fixate. And this is also a chemical treatment or a thermal treatment. So that's what they do. And then there's the after treatment. It's also important, because you need to remove the excess dye and chemicals, and sometimes they also add some chemicals to enhance the feel of the product, so that when you touch the yarn, it feels very nice. And you can do that excess dye after treatment with rinsing, of course, and soaping and washing and steaming, and also conditioning if you apply something on the surface of the yarn to improve, regain some of the properties of the yarn, or make other properties depending on what you want. I am a science freak, as you probably know by now, so I have been very curious, and I have scanned through some scientific papers of the latest technologies in how to make yarn. And I can tell you a lot is being done and researched in order to provide us with yarn without chemicals, and applying methods so that it's as least harmful as possible, both for the properties of the yarn but also for us users. So a lot of things are being done that we can benefit from once finalized. Okay, let's move on to the question here. How or if this dyeing process affects our yarn, and is the natural yarn properties actually preserved during the dyeing process? As I said from the articles and what I know, please help us out there, those of you who know a lot more about dyeing and manufacturing of yarn. I would expect that manufacturers out there optimize their processes to ensure careful handling and considerations to preserve the integrity and the performance of the wool fibers. Of course they do. They want to provide us with a nice product that can become nice garments and fabric. But of course it's inevitable that dyeing involves chemistry. However, as I said before, this specific yarn is tested and free from harmful substances, and that's what should make you feel ensured in that sense. So I have taken the example of this burnt orange here that one of my testers used for the male model. And you can see from the samples below, there's the natural pearl gray color and this burnt orange. First we have the unblocked and then the blocked one, and you can see a slight difference here. So this leads me to the next poster, and that is when you're a designer and you decide on using a lovely wool, this implies a lot of testing, because you want to make sure that both the natural colors as well as the dyed colors, they will work in your pattern. So testing. And I would say that the properties are almost preserved, but my take is that depending on the dye you use, and hence the process ensuring the binding and the fixation may influence the properties of the wool compared to the natural undyed wool. And you can see on this picture here, I'm showing that in the upper part of the picture we have on the left hand side the natural colors, and I have some dyed being exactly behaving exactly the same way as the undyed ones, and then the ones below, they behave a bit differently. It is not much, but when you make a sweater and you want to have a specific ease, of course it's important if it widens more up than compared to the natural wool. So that's how it is. But now let's look at some practical examples so you can see it. So I will turn the camera from looking at me and posters to looking at the table here and some of the examples. I have now lined up the swatches for a close-up look, and here on the left hand side you see the unblocked ones and the blocked ones, and you can see, as I told you, you cannot see the pearl line, it's not visible, and that accounts for all colors. However, in the blocked ones, you see this fine line, and you can see that the stitches, they have settled and give a very nice and even look. And I have stacked these in the order of action of the dye, so to speak. So here you see the undyed ones, and this is color 212, my absolute favorite. It's the pearl gray. And here's the brown one. Do I have it? Yes. It is 208. The young model with the long pigtail, she is wearing this color. And here we have the blue one. Where was it? And the green. Should I mention the colors? I don't know if you're interested. 210, it's pearl gray. The green one is 233. It's called dark green, I guess. And here's the blue one. It's here. It is color 222. We have the burgundy. It is 258. The orange, burnt orange, it is 244. And this very bright Lego blue, it's called royal blue, 225. And last but not least, the navy blue, 226. So what can we get out of this? We can, and what I've done is I have placed all these swatches on top of each other. I have measured them and I've added in the numbers to make the statistics, but there's nothing better than the visuals, right? So if we take, for example, this undyed one and place it on a dyed one resembling the undyed yarn. Let me see if I can do this without getting lost in all the colors. Sorry. But then you can see that when aligning here in the bottom and the top, you can see it's exactly the same size. Also width-wise, I measure on the back side, it's more reliable when you do a ribbed pattern. And you can also do the comparison here and see that when aligned, it's the same thing. And then I move on to the other colors and see what happens. And we have also looked a bit at the orange, so let's take that one as an example. So we can just place this one on top and see it looks the same in height, right? And it looks the same in the width when looking at it unblocked. But when looking at it blocked, you see there's a slight difference. Not a whole tree trunk, but a bit. But the height is the same. And the one color being a bit of an outlier perhaps, it is compared to all the other ones, because when we start up knitting, you see the same thing, same height, same width. But when we look at the blocked one, something else happened. This was predictable with the dye, but this one, wow. So now, having seen those close up, let's have a look at the results. I don't know about you, but I find this very intriguing and fun. And I really enjoy the process getting to the result. Of course, you want the result of a nice and fine pattern that works and everybody can get happy with the result. But if you only enjoy the glimpses and moments when you have the result, I guess there are fewer of those. So I really enjoy the process of investigating and checking out and troubleshooting and yeah, the small things in life. So it's so fun. But let's move on to the result, because however fun the process is, it's the result you have to rely on. So let's look at the next poster here. And you can see the gauge before blocking of the natural and the dyed yarns is actually the same. So you can lead to believe when you do this that, okay, I'm on gauge and everything is fine. I skip the blocking step because I use this yarn and I'm happy, and I need to move on with the knitting. However, I cannot stress for this project as well as every other sweater project, please do your blocking and the after measurements on your block swatch, because otherwise you will not know how it behaves when you start washing your garment. If you do, if you don't, it's not important. Okay, but the gauge after blocking, I've done all the testing as you saw and added in Excel and statistics and so on, and I can tell you in average the natural undyed yarns they get from 27 to 29 rows, which is also the case in average for the dyed yarns. However, this stitch count changes, and now knowing this, it gets rather predictable. So before starting all the testing, it felt like unpredictable yarn, but actually now it is, because the colored yarns just widens up a bit more, and once you know the stitch count, it is no problem. You can just do something about it. And let's look at this next poster. So what to do? So what do we do now that we know that there may be a slight difference between the undyed and the dyed colors? How do we crack the nut to become a nice product that we can rely on? Yeah, let's look at the next poster here, because of course it starts with a designer. So you have to do a lot of testing to make sure that the yarn you use can get a uniform product no matter the color you get. So you have to get to the step where you can advise and know what happens. So that's the pattern development. But then what can you do as a knitter? You can of course do your own gauge watching, as we would always recommend when doing a sweater project, and use your specific yarn and your specific color and see what happens, and note down your before and after measurements. And like always, you can adjust your tools to get gauge, and or you can just pick another sweater size. And I think that was my meaning to get a cliffhanger here for the next tutorial, because in the next tutorial we will talk about gauge watching and how you can just with simple means go from your specific yarn, from Viking Eco Highland Wool or any other yarn you choose, to go from this to the pattern and pick your right size. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. Let's meet up in episode number 2 talking about gauge watching.